from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay, it's crop tour time, and our teams are fanning out into the field.
I'm Michelle Rook. We'll take a look at Minnesota yield prospects after a disastrous start to the crop year.
We'll tell you about the biggest misconception about crop tour and why this year's tour could be so relevant.
All eyes are on the Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour. We'll tell you why coming up.
Coverage of the 2019 Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour is brought to you by Pioneer, our premier sponsor, with support from IBM, RCIS, RAM, AeroVironment, Titan Tires, Farmable, and Farm Credit Services of America.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Happening right now, the scouts are leaving for the Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour, checking out yield potential in the Corn Belt. Now, scouts in the east are taking samples from Ohio today, while scouts out west start out in South Dakota. And that's where we'll find AgDay's Betsy Gibbon this week. We begin our week of team coverage with her. Now, Betsy, a lot is riding on this year's tour.
That's right, Clinton. After this spring, everyone is trying to figure out the maturity and size of this year's crop. The crop tour prides itself on being uniform. The scouts go on the same routes, collects samples the same way, and conducts its yield samples the same week each year. The difference is the Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour will be the first large effort to gather objective yield data in the field for August. That means scouts will be in the field taking samples on the yield potential. In its August report, USDA did not collect objective yield data and plans to wait until the crop is more mature. The department used farmer surveys and satellite imagery for its August report.
Now this year, is that information going to be perfect in the third week of August? Heck no. This is going to be one of the most imperfect years for pulling samples that we've done in the 26 years of the crop tour. The more mature the crop is, the better the crop tour does.
Flory says the tour won't do anything official when it comes to prevent plant acres. He says FSA is the best place to go for that data, but he does say scouts will give their observations on what they saw.
All right, thanks, Betsy. Farm Journal's Tyne Morgan will be joining me on the eastern leg of the tour. Tyne, the scouts will be facing a lot of different conditions this year.
Yeah, Clinton, that's right. And scouts definitely have their work cut out for them. Not only will some scouts run across the most immature crops that they've ever seen on crop tour, but also bare fields like the ones behind me. And the scout leads tell me it's the consistency of the methodology that makes crop tour so relevant year after year.
From bare dirt to immature crops, scouts on the 2019 Pro Farmer Crop Tour will travel thousands of miles, seeing some extreme variability in fields.
Anytime we have immature crops on crop tour, it makes it more difficult.
There's stuff that's just now pollinating for corn. I mean, that's even harder because by the third week of August, usually we've pollinated 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks earlier than that. So the corn might even be more difficult than the beans. They're both going to be difficult.
A crop tour that could measure more potential than actual yield.
With that being the case this year, it just leaves more room for interpretations.
Grady says the tour uses the same methodology every year in every field.
If you end up in an area that's drowned out or a halo spot or whatever the case may be, you still measure it.
With 1,400 samples of corn and 1,400 samples of soybeans after a week of wading through fields, some fields this year not even setting pods.
And if it's a field that has no pods on it, then you're going to have to say, well, there's no pods on it, and that becomes a 0.
With a record number of prevent plant on some routes, Grady says the tour's methodology won't change.
If we see a field that's PP, we do not stop and sample that. There's no sample to take from those acres.
Immature crop or not, it's a random set of samples on the same routes year after year, creating a crop tour that will be watched closely by many.
So we are going to have on the crop tour the first boots in the field, as opposed to normal years when USDA has already gone out and made some ear counts, counted some pods, usually not too many. But that's what's really important about this year's crop tour, and that's why people are going to be watching it very closely.
Giving the crop tour a large data set in the end, data that will give Pro Farmer a good idea of the crop size this year.
On Friday, at the end of crop tour, Pro Farmer issues its national corn and soybean crop estimates, and we take into account the crop tour data, plus all the other factors, crop maturity being one of those, areas outside of the crop tour states that we don't sample in, weather, how we think the crop will finish, those types of factors.
Now, Clinton, both Grady and Wilson tell me the samples are random. They do not cherry pick fields, and that's one of the biggest misconceptions about crop tour, Grady says. They don't pick the best fields or the worst fields. They drive so many miles, find a corn and a soybean field next to each other, get out, take samples, and go on to the next. And like I said, that's what makes crop tour so highly watched, especially this year. Clinton?
The tour wraps up in Rochester, Minnesota on Friday. Michelle Rook, well, she spoke to farmers there about their concerns.
It was a disastrous start to the crop season for Minnesota farmers with relentless rains and flooding and historic prevented plant acres. That was especially true in southwestern Minnesota.
Out of 2,300 acres that we farm, 1,800 is prevent plant. 200 acres of corn and 300 acres of soybeans is all we got in.
I think we're 1.1 million acres of prevent plant in the state of Minnesota.
As you move east and north in the state, more of the crop got planted, but at various times, and corn is very uneven due to nitrogen loss.
The fields are not that good, even course over the top, as we get into the field. There's too many drowned outs and low spots.
Both corn and soybeans were planted late and are behind in development.
There again, there was a lot of late beans planted, and we need a long fall to get them mature.
So that's going to push some of this late planted corn way into the month of October. So the concern is frost in September for possibilities.
That will also mean increased drying costs on corn.
I'm looking, we could be at that 25% moisture corn. That's 10 points to bring out.
Quite a bit of that corn, unless we have a phenomenal fall, is probably going to have to go through some kind of a drying operation into this fall, into storage, so we have it at the proper moisture.
Farmers say corn will be lighter test weight and have lower yields with very few 200 bushel field averages.
We're like 160 to 170 on corn, and we're probably in that area. Not as good as a year ago, but probably in the 10-year average.
We've probably got more of a average for us in our area, 165 to 170, because we got too many drowned outs, too many low areas where it was compacted when we were putting it in or muddy.
The overall state, even in the better areas, are going to see just a little bit lower yields. So 175 plus or minus, I think, is going to catch Minnesota.
Soybean yields are also expected to be down with the late season, except for the northern counties, which had timely planting.
Soybeans should be average or a little bit above because we've been a little bit on the dry side.
The best I can hope for on soybeans is average. I'm thinking that it could be compared to last year, I could be down 15 bushels an acre.
I'm actually thinking that Minnesota is going to be something closer to maybe 46 bushels an acre.
And again, an early frost would be devastating for the beans. In Minnesota, I'm Michelle Rook reporting for AgDay.
And we've only just started on the Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour. Look for coverage all this week online at agweb.com. Plus, Tyne, Betsy, and I will all be out in the field and bringing you reports on what we see and what the numbers show all this week on AgDay and via social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And it looks like we might have some additional help on the crop tour, as meteorologist Mike Hoffman shows us in today's Crop Comments. Mike.
Thanks, Clinton. Mitch Hamsath of Decorah, Iowa shared this picture with us. Mitch said these young farm helpers were planning to do a little crop scouting of their own, and it looks like they're also getting some help of the four-legged variety as well. And taking another look at the drought monitor, it's been getting worse. Western Oklahoma, northwest Texas, into South Texas, and also in the Three Eyes, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, at least in places. Other parts that are dry have just been that way for a little while. I'll have more on your forecast coming up.
All right, next, while we wait for markets to kick back off this week, instead we'll dig into some other headlines that could impact the industry. And later, a farmer speaking out, trying to prevent more tragedies when it comes to grain bins.
AgDay, presented by the all-new Chevy Silverado, the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever.
Deere is cutting its earnings forecast this year, reducing its net income outlook to $3.2 billion. It had forecasted earnings to be $3.3 billion. Now, Deere saying its third quarter results, quote, reflected the high degree of uncertainty that continues to overshadow the agricultural sector, blaming uncertainty over exports, demand, and overall crop conditions for many farmers having to postpone buying major equipment. China's pig herd continuing to shrink. The Agriculture Ministry reporting the herd shrank by 32.2% in July from the previous year. That's as African swine fever continues to grow. The ministry also reporting the number of sows declined by almost 32%. But industry experts, well, they believe the herd loss to be much higher, some estimating the country has lost up to half of its pigs. Keeping you updated on trade negotiations with China, here's a run-through of the latest. President Trump signaling he would like to have a phone call soon with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and suggesting the trade war would be fairly short. U.S. and China trade officials will hold a teleconference within 2 weeks, and China confirming a person-to-person meeting in Washington in September. Still ahead, something you have to see to believe. Details on what fell from the sky recently in Colorado.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
Check out this gigantic hailstone. It was found last week in Bethune, Colorado. The state climatologist of Colorado and the folks from the National Weather Service traveled to see it in person and measure it. Now, they confirmed the diameter was a new record size of 4.83 inches. That broke the old state record of 4.5 inches. But get this, photo evidence from Twitter shows the stone was initially larger than that. The homeowner said she put it in the freezer about 30 minutes after taking that first photo. So they still need to go over all the information to determine what the exact size will be listed as in the official record. Just, can you imagine? I mean, almost the size of a softball.
That's deadly if it hits you in the right spot. You know, that does major damage. That's just unbelievable.
Unbelievable record.
It is amazing in the weather sometimes, but here's the way things are shaping up as far as moisture is concerned over the past week. Now, this does take us from a week ago Saturday through this past Friday. These are all radar estimates. You can see some of the heavier areas are in the southeast and northern plains, but there were pockets that got ½ inch to an inch in many other parts of the country. Others didn't get nearly enough, but boy, you can see there are some huge amounts there north of Tampa on the Gulf side of the peninsula of Florida, with amounts over 8 inches estimated there in a large area. And taking a look at the northern plains, we had multiple complexes move from the western plains, so across Nebraska, northern Kansas, eastern Kansas, Missouri, and into central Illinois, with a few spots like east of St. Louis and also in northwest Kansas picking up an estimated 8 inches of rain during that 7-day period. So there were some areas that got a whole bunch of it. Here's the jet stream as we head through this week. A weak trough coming into the Great Lakes, and then it becomes stronger, basically. More energy feeds into it, and all computer models have flip-flopped a little bit. 6-7 days ago, it was looking really warm during this period, but it looks like a quick 2 to 3 day shot of cooler air for the Great Lakes in the Northeast especially, and that'll go down into the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic as well for a day or two. But boy, the heat continues by the end of the week, as you can see, and for the most part it's going to, except the ridge kind of gets shoved off the west coast and off the east coast. We have a weak trough by early next week developing in the middle of the country again, and that seems to be a little bit of a theme. So temperatures this week, I'm going to go below normal for most of Minnesota, Wisconsin, northern Michigan northward, above normal for the far southeast and most of the west. Precipitation this week above normal for the upper Mississippi Valley, western lakes, above normal many parts of the southeast, and then below normal West Texas, Oklahoma, unfortunately, all the way through the west. 30-day outlook for temperatures below normal, northern plains, above normal most of the rest of the lower 48 except the central plains and the western lakes. 30-day outlook for precipitation above normal in the southeast and the northern plains again. Down into parts of the Four Corner region, I'm going below normal for the northeast. That's a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. Heading to Denver, Colorado, first of all, partly to mostly sunny and hot, high of 96. Texarkana, Texas, hot and humid with sunshine, high of 98. And Pittsburgh, PA, partly sunny, hot and humid, afternoon high around 91.
All right, up next, Machinery Pete is looking for stuff that's really nice.
Hey, stay tuned folks, coming up I'm going to tell you how much of a premium really nice condition stuff is bringing right now versus average stuff.
Farm Journal Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour drone coverage brought to you by AeroVironment. Maximize every acre with the Quantix and AV DSS drone and data analytics ecosystem. Proceed with certainty.
Machinery Pete is here, and he says there's really just one thing to consider when buying used farm equipment.
Well folks, I've been talking a lot recently about how the current used farm equipment market is all about condition and hours, more so than I've ever seen in my 30 years tracking the market. Now let me show you a really good example of this. Let's take a common tractor, a John Deere 8300, 200 horse. Deere made this thing from 95 to 99, so just over 20 years old at this point. Now, through July of this year, I had seen 22 8300 sold at auction. Average sale price, $42,820. Remember that number. Now, here's a common one, very close to that average. This is a picture of a 95 model 8300, 8,100 hours on it, sold March 23rd of this year. Farm auction Northeast Iowa brought $40,000, so almost right on the average. Now let's talk about what the really nice ones bring. So the first 10 days of August, I saw 3 different John Deere 8300 sold on 3 separate farm auctions, all in north central Iowa. Now here's the first one. This was a 98 model, 4,434 hours on it, sold for $75,000, highest price this year on an 8300. Now 6 days later, same area, this 96 model, 3,731 hours on it, brought $71,000. And 2 days after that, again, same area, August 9th, this 99 model with 5,499 hours on it brought $62,000. So those 3 way above the average auction price. And it just shows you when the item is right, the buyer demand is definitely there.
All right, thanks, Greg. Now, there are tragedies that happen every year on farms across the country, but one farmer is speaking out in hopes of saving lives. His story is next.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
A Minnesota man died last week in a farming accident. Police say the 18-year-old made contact with a piece of equipment while working inside a grain bin and passed away from his injuries. Now, farmers know grain bins can be dangerous places. Ruta Olsenida of affiliate KMTV Channel 3 in Omaha, Nebraska, has a story of one farmer who's trying to prevent people from losing more loved ones in these types of accidents.
Lee Woolen is a farmer through and through.
My great-grandfather homesteaded in 1889, and so I think I'm the 4th generation.
So he knows a thing or two about the craft. When he was younger, Lee and his siblings would constantly be helping out on the family farm. 20 years ago, Lee and his siblings were doing their rounds. But this time was different. It's a day Lee will never forget.
That's where we found him, under the corn, was in that area.
An accident that changed Lee's life.
It was hard.
His 15-year-old brother.
I didn't check on him. I just went to the co-op.
Suffocating in one of the family grain bins.
Started moving corn down with the scoop, and that's when his foot came up out of the corn.
And these accidents are not that uncommon.
Flowing grain is just like quicksand. Really all it takes is 2 to 3 seconds for that grain to start flowing around you before it starts getting difficult to get out of.
20 years later, Lee wants to use his tragedy
just to help people slow down and take the extra 30 seconds to check on the person you're working with.
To prevent future accidents.
It was a hard learning lesson that I don't want anybody else to have to learn.
It would have made Alex very proud.
Maybe I can help save somebody's life and make a difference.
Reporting in Wilcox, Ruta Olsenida, 3 News Now.
An important message, and we thank KMTV for sharing that report. Now, before we go, we want to welcome several new affiliates now bringing AgDay to you each and every weekday. Welcome aboard, and we can't wait to share with all of you what's happening every day out in farm country. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Be safe out there.
Coverage of the 2019 Pro Farmer Midwest Crop Tour is brought to you by Pioneer, our premier sponsor, with support from IBM, RCIS, RAM, AeroVironment, Titan Tires, Farmable, and Farm Credit Services of America.